the young, I think, have pushed the regime considerably, have forced changes to the government. Now, some people, including some in the British left, then put this as the fact that the Iranian government is democratic. That isn't what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that grassroots movements have gained these through perseverance, through fighting, through building their forces, and they are winning. They are not winning the battle overnight, but that's the way they can change that system. However, one aspect of the, if you like, the democratic struggles or the democratic fights of Iranian people with the regime that is rarely mentioned is that the severest repressions in Iran are dished out because of economic issues, because people go on strike because they haven't been paid for weeks or months occasionally. There are many strikes against, there are many protests against casualization. I don't know if we can see some of the, there are many strikes against the fact that the Iranian government is the best follower of IMF's neoliberal economic policies. The fact that the IMF considers Iran its model country in terms of casualization, privatization, and so on. And it'd be very difficult for people who are involved in such struggles to come to the conclusion that a US intervention will create a kind of regime change that will bring about an amelioration or an improvement of their conditions. So it's very unlikely that those who were arrested, like the bus workers, like the teachers, like the sugarcane workers in December, like the tire workers, will find it, will be keen to have a kind of military intervention that will increase or at least keep the level of neoliberal economic policy. And I think that's one aspect of Iran that is very rarely mentioned. The fact that the US has conflict with Iran is a different matter, and we can discuss this later. But it isn't because it's disobeying economic policy. And for those kind of movements, I think any form of US support has always been damaging, because the regime then uses very genuine demands for people demanding their case to be, their salaries to be paid and so on, as part of an argument to call them CIA agents or elements of foreign powers, and increasing the repression against them. So the movement, the threat of war has created a far worse situation for these protest movements that were the foundations of a grassroots movement inside Iran. And I also think that some of the verbal support given by US administration people haven't helped these people. And so, as I said, I find it very difficult how that kind of regime change can help. The other big movement I'm going to refer to is the student movement in Iran. And again, in 1998, when most of us heard about the student movement, most of the West heard about the Iranian student movement, they were divided, what I would say in general, a majority of them were divided into two categories. Those who were to the reformist factions left, or who were reformists, who wanted change within the Khatami regime, but slightly more. And there was a vast section of the students who, I talked to, a lot of them were reading Popple and were very interested in liberal ideology and so on. That situation has dramatically changed, whether we like it or not. That situation changed with the invasion of and the occupation of Afghanistan and the invasion and occupation of Iraq. Now, if you look at the student protest, if you look at the slogans they put out, it's of a different nature. We are talking of a student movement that has many layers, has many different opinions within it, but you couldn't find either royalists or defenders of the Shah or defenders of Popple or reformists in the majority of the student movement. I'm not saying they don't exist, but they don't form the vocal, they are not the voice of the student movement. And finally, and And for those reasons, the student movement waged one of the biggest anti-war protests in Iran in December, only for their leaders to be arrested, because I don't think the Iranian government is anti-war. But this isn't a student movement that will welcome US intervention, military intervention. And finally, there is the women's movement. And obviously, the women's movement is much more multi-layered. It has many different opinions within it. It's very diverse. It's one of the strongest of the movements inside Iran. And it also shows that, contrary to what people think, the modern phenomena of political Islam in Iran has created its own opposition, which much deeper roots than the kind of women's movements that artificially have been tried to be implanted in countries like Afghanistan, or attempts that were made at some stage in Iraq, whether they were dismantled. The women's movement in Iran took to the streets on the 8th of March 1979. It was the first large protest against the Islamic regime. And it has used the fact that segregation and sexual apartheid do not allow joint meetings of both sexes to its advantage by creating networks of women, by creating groups of women that work together and have pushed at all times for the improvement of the plight of women. And I do agree that we face many different opinions, many different political lines, but within that, I would say that the right-wing side of it is led by Shirin Ebadi and those who want reform within the Islamic State, and the more radical side of it are those who do not believe in any form of reform within the Islamic State. So I summarize by saying that there are already movements inside Iran. Every time the US has tried to propel them or claim support for them, it has damaged them, in my opinion. The threat of war has threatened the Islamic Republic. It has threatened the Islamic Republic. It has made the Islamic Republic stronger because it can use the excuse of a foreign threat to attack its own population. And for those reasons, I'm against any form of intervention.
Yassamine, thanks very much.